A 300-meter warship is surrounded by freezing black water. The temperature has dropped to negative 30 degrees Celsius. Waves are crashing over the deck, the flight deck is coated in a sheet of ice, and somewhere up there a fighter jet is about to land. This is not a drill. This is not a war game. This actually happened. In the summer of 2025, the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest, most advanced, and most expensive aircraft carrier ever built, sailed into the Arctic. $13 billion of American naval power pushed farther north than any U.S. carrier had gone in decades. And what happened up there tested every system, every crew member, and every piece of technology on that ship in ways that most people will never hear about. But you are about to. Here is what most people get wrong about carriers in the Arctic. They assume these ships are built for warm waters, that the cold is just uncomfortable. But what actually happens in the Arctic is far more serious than that. The cold does not just make sailors miserable. It attacks the ship itself. It attacks the aircraft. It attacks the systems. And if you do not know exactly how to fight back against every single one of those threats, simultaneously, something goes very, very wrong. So today, we are going to go through the whole picture. What the cold actually does to a carrier. How the crew fights back. What nearly failed. What actually worked. And why, despite all of it, the United States Navy sailed one of its most powerful ships straight into one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Before we get into it, if you have served in the military or you have always respected the men and women who protect this country, drop a comment below and let us know. We want to hear from you. Let us start with the flight deck, because that is where everything begins and where everything can go wrong the fastest. The flight deck of an aircraft carrier is already the most dangerous workplace on the planet in normal conditions. Jet engines screaming at full power, aircraft moving at high speed across a surface smaller than a runway. Crew members working in every direction at once. One wrong step, and you are gone. Now add minus 30 degrees Celsius. Add wind speeds that can knock a grown man off his feet. Add a deck covered in ice. That is what the crew of the Gerald R. Ford faced in the Arctic in August and September of 2025. When temperatures drop that low, water freezes on every surface almost instantly. The flight deck, a flat, open metal surface exposed directly to wind and ocean spray, becomes a sheet of ice in a matter of minutes. And here's the problem with that. Every aircraft that needs to launch or land depends on that deck being clean and firm. A jet rolling toward a catapult on an icy deck can lose traction. A pilot coming in for a landing on an icy surface can skid straight off the edge. So how do they deal with it? The U.S. Navy uses a layered approach. Portable hot water pressure washers are brought out to blast ice off the deck surfaces. Hot air blowers are used on smaller areas and around critical equipment. Large crews, sometimes dozens of sailors at once, work manually with tools to clear sections of deck before every single aircraft movement. And here is something that not many people realize. Chemical de-icing fluids exist on these ships, but they are avoided whenever possible. Why? Because chemicals can contaminate the deck surface in ways that create other problems for landing gear and equipment. Steam is also used in some cases, superheated enough that it evaporates off the metal surface before it can refreeze. But all of that takes time. And in combat operations, time is the one thing you do not have. The other threat on the flight deck is what happens to the aircraft themselves. Here is a fact that surprises most people. Most of the fighter jets that fly off carriers are not certified for icing conditions on the outside of the airframe. They have de-icing systems for engine inlets and cockpit windscreens, but not for the full body of the aircraft. So if ice builds up on a wing surface before launch, you have a serious problem. The solution is timing. Crews clean the aircraft right before they move to the catapult. The window between cleaning and launch has to be tight enough that ice cannot reform. If conditions are severe enough that ice can form in that short window, flight operations stop. It is that simple. No amount of pride or urgency changes that calculation. Now let us talk about what the cold does below the waterline, because this is the part that gets almost no attention and it is just as dangerous. When you are operating in Arctic waters, ice is not just on the surface, it is floating in the water around the ship. And while a carrier is not going to sail straight into a solid ice pack, it absolutely operates in waters full of floating chunks, some the size of a car, some the size of a house. Aircraft carriers are not icebreakers. Their hulls are not reinforced for breaking through ice. A collision with a large ice chunk at the wrong angle can cause serious structural damage. So navigation in Arctic waters requires constant awareness of what is in the water around you, day and night, in conditions where visibility is often severely reduced by fog, snow, and darkness. And then there is the propeller problem. Ice fragments can get pulled into the water flow around a ship's propellers. When ice builds up on a propeller, it changes the balance of the blades. That causes vibration. Vibration causes mechanical wear. And over time, or in a sudden impact, it can cause damage that reduces the ship's speed and maneuverability at exactly the moment when speed and maneuverability matter most. The Gerald R. Ford has a major advantage here that older carriers do not. It is powered by 2 nuclear reactors. Those reactors produce enormous amounts of power, enough to push the ship through difficult water conditions that would force a conventionally powered ship to slow down or stop. Nuclear propulsion does not get tired. It does not run out of fuel. But even nuclear power cannot change the basic physics of what ice does to metal. Here is something worth thinking about. Do you think the U.S. Navy should be doing more of these Arctic deployments? Drop your answer in the comments. We would love to know what you think. Before we go further, take a second right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of people who watch our videos are not subscribed. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference for us to keep bringing you content like this. Now we need to talk about something that very few people outside of military circles fully understand, and it is the challenge that the U.S. Navy considers one of its most serious in the Arctic. Communications. Up here, in the world's most extreme military environment, the technology that modern navies depend on for everything, navigation, targeting, coordination, communication, starts to break down. Here is the reason why. Most of the satellites that the U.S. military relies on for GPS and communications are positioned in orbits designed to cover populated areas of the Earth. The Arctic, by definition, is not heavily populated. Those satellites orbit at angles that work well between roughly 55 degrees north and 55 degrees south latitude. Above that, satellite elevation angles get lower and lower. By the time you are at 78 degrees north, which is where the Gerald R. Ford was operating near Svalbard in 2025, GPS signals are degraded, and certain communication satellites cannot be seen from the ship at all. And it gets worse. The Arctic atmosphere is filled with ionospheric activity, charged particles from the sun interacting with Earth's magnetic field. This ionospheric interference scrambles GPS signals. It disrupts satellite communication links. It can cause navigation errors significant enough to make precision-guided weapons unreliable. Think about what that means for an aircraft carrier. Modern carrier operations depend on precise positioning data for everything: landing aircraft, coordinating with escort ships, targeting, logistics. If GPS starts giving you wrong information and you do not catch it fast enough, the consequences can be severe. The only satellite communication system that actually works across the entire Arctic region is the Iridium network, which uses satellites in low polar orbit. Everything else, the systems that a carrier strike group normally relies on, has serious limitations above 80 degrees north. The fallback is HF radio, high-frequency radio waves that bounce off the upper atmosphere and can travel thousands of miles. It works. But it is nothing like the high-bandwidth, real-time communications that modern operations require. It is like going from a high-speed data connection back to a phone line from 30 years ago. And on top of all of this, Russia has invested heavily in Arctic GPS jamming capabilities. Their military can deliberately disrupt GPS signals across large areas of the high north. In a real conflict, every precision system on that carrier, every guided weapon, every navigation tool, every communication link that depends on satellite positioning would be operating in a degraded or hostile electronic environment. That is not a theoretical problem. That is the reality of the Arctic right now. Now let us talk about the human beings on that ship, because they are the ones who make everything else work, and the cold has very specific things it does to people that commanders have to plan around. On a carrier flight deck in the Arctic, sailors are working in minus 30 degrees Celsius wind chills. They are wearing extreme cold weather gear, thick gloves, layered clothing, face protection. That gear keeps them alive. But it also reduces their dexterity. Simple tasks that take 10 seconds in normal conditions take 45 seconds when your hands are wrapped in Arctic gloves. Faster hands mean faster operations. Slower hands mean longer exposure time in dangerous areas of the flight deck. The other issue is condensation. When equipment and machinery move between the warm interior of the ship and the freezing outside air, condensation forms on metal surfaces. That condensation can freeze on weapon systems, on sensors, on mechanical components. It gets inside equipment. It causes malfunctions. Cold weather lubricants have to be used on everything. Standard lubricants thicken in extreme cold and stop working properly. Batteries die faster. Radios need extra insulation. Mechanical systems need more maintenance time. Everything takes longer. Every margin gets tighter. And then there is the psychological side. Operations in permanent darkness, the Arctic winter has periods with no sunlight at all, affect crew sleep cycles, awareness, and reaction time. The isolation of operating thousands of miles from any support infrastructure adds a weight to decision-making that does not exist in warmer, more accessible theaters. The U.S. Fleet Forces commander stated clearly in 2024 that the U.S. military must ramp up realistic high-end training in Arctic conditions, acknowledging that historically the United States had not invested enough in building the skills and experience needed to sustain these operations. What is the one thing you think would surprise most people about operating a carrier in the Arctic? Drop it in the comments. We read every single one. Let us talk about the mission itself. Because understanding why the U.S. Navy sent its most powerful carrier to the Arctic in 2025 tells you everything about where the world is heading right now. The USS Gerald R. Ford did not go to the Arctic for a routine training exercise. This deployment, from August 23rd to September 8th of 2025, was what naval analysts called a declaration of capability. It was the farthest north a U.S. carrier had operated in decades. It was the first time the Ford-class strike group was fully integrated under NATO's Allied Maritime Command. Norwegian, German, and French warships operated alongside the American carrier in what was clearly a coordinated strategic message. To who? To Russia. And increasingly, to China. Here is why the Arctic matters so much right now. There is a corridor of water between the Barents Sea and the Norwegian Sea that military planners call the Bear Gap. Russia's nuclear submarine fleet, the submarines that carry the weapons capable of striking any city in the world, must pass through that corridor to reach the open Atlantic. Controlling that corridor is one of the most important strategic tasks in all of modern naval warfare. If the United States and NATO can project carrier air power into the Bear Gap, they can monitor, track, and if necessary, confront every Russian submarine that tries to pass through. Russian coastal defense missiles, including the Bastion P system, can deny access to large portions of the Arctic if they go unopposed. Russian strategic bombers and air defense networks have been reinforced across the region in recent years. Russia was not pleased with the Ford deployment. The Kremlin called NATO exercises in the high north provocative. Russian ships and aircraft tracked the American carrier strike group throughout the operation. Moscow described earlier U.S. carrier visits to Norway as, quote, illogical and harmful. And China? China calls itself a near-Arctic state, which it is not geographically. But in October of 2024, Chinese Coast Guard vessels conducted their first ever Arctic patrol alongside the Russian Navy. China has built 2 polar icebreakers and is rapidly expanding its presence on Arctic shipping routes. The Northern Sea Route along Russia's Arctic coast carried nearly 38 million tons of cargo in 2024, a record number. China wants a piece of that route, and it wants influence over the waters that come with it. Now let us close with the thing that the 2025 deployment actually proved, because this is the part that matters for the future. The USS Gerald R. Ford completed flight operations in the Arctic. The ship's electromagnetic aircraft launch system, the completely new technology that replaced steam catapults and had faced years of reliability questions, performed in freezing conditions. Aircraft launched and recovered successfully in an environment that had long been considered a hard limit for carrier aviation. The logistics chain that supports the strike group, fuel, parts, ordnance, supplies, held together in a region with almost no port infrastructure within reach. None of that was guaranteed. Every single one of those outcomes required extraordinary planning, training, and execution by thousands of U.S. military personnel. The Arctic is no longer a place where carriers occasionally visit to make a point. According to the DoD's 2024 Arctic strategy, the High North is now a permanent part of the United States military's operational picture. Persistent presence, enhanced awareness, sustained capability, that shift is happening right now. And the men and women of the U.S. Navy, the ones de-icing a flight deck at minus 30 degrees at 2 in the morning, the ones nursing a communication system that barely works through Arctic interference, the ones landing a 60,000-pound aircraft on a ship moving through icy polar seas, they are the reason it is possible at all. The Arctic used to be a place the military avoided. Now it is a place they have to own. And based on what happened in 2025, they are well on their way to doing exactly that. If this gave you a new understanding of what the U.S. military is actually doing in the world right now, hit that like button and subscribe. Every like and subscription helps this channel keep bringing you the real stories behind the headlines, the ones that most people never take the time to find out.